and welcome to our session for World Fish Migration Day, but also World River Dolphin Day. For those of you who are joining us for the first time who don't know who we are, learn Indian freshwater ecosystems, and we use the acronym LIFE. So we're a collective. Effectively, we're a concept. We're not an organization. I represent Marcia Trust, and then we also have Anuja and Sneha, who are from Freshwater Turtles and Tortoises of India, and Gopa, who's from Nityata River Otter Conservancy. And between us, we create videos with some experts talking about areas of freshwater ecosystems that cross over, so where things intersect. Today, we're going to be looking at migratory fish because it's World Fish Migration Day, and also Gangetic river dolphins, but also looking a little bit about the communities that live along the lower Ganges basin. So we're connecting these three issues, and it's my pleasure to introduce my guests. I'll explain a little bit more about them as we move through the session. Also to say, very excited that today I've joined a few World Fish Migration Day webinars, and particularly one organised by WWF Myanmar. And Chris Bonsey, who works for WWF Myanmar, has been asking me about this LIFE concept that we have and how we can spin this out into other countries across South and Southeast Asia. And effectively what we're doing is creating videos by asking experts to connect, and then these videos are available free of charge to anybody who wants to build their knowledge of freshwater ecosystems. In this instance, in India. Although obviously, as I mentioned before, we're talking about Hilsa and Gangetic dolphins. So there will also be spin out into Myanmar, Bangladesh, Pakistan. All of these places have either or both of Hilsa, Gangetic dolphins. Oh, and I missed Nepal as well. Nepal, of course, also have Gangetic dolphins. So what I'm going to do is introduce our first expert, and she'll be talking about the ecology of Hilsa fish, a most important migratory fish. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sajina, who we've been talking for just over a week, came highly recommended by a good friend of mine, good colleague of mine. So Sajina, the floor is all yours. Can I ask you then, it's World Fish Migration Day. So how important is migration for Hilsa fish?
Yes. Hilsa is unique due to its migratory nature, and the species is almost iconic to migration among Indian fishes. I would say Hilsa is the most commercially important species among the migratory Indian fishes. I will start by sharing my screen.
Yeah.
Can you enable me to share the screen?
Oh, sorry, yes. It should be possible.
No, it is showing host to disabled participants.
Yeah. Sorry, yes, 1 second. Sneha, can you make Sajina a co-host, please?
She already is. Just a minute. I shall do that.
Okay. So it's interesting that you've started with Hilsa, maybe the most important migratory fish.
Okay.
And are you able to share now? Could you please check?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, here we go.
Is it visible now? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll be focusing on the distribution and ecology of Hilsa. The Hilsa shad, Tenulosa ilifia, belongs to the family Clupidae, a family to which the most preferred food fishes of the world, like sardines, herrings, pilchards, menhaden, sprats, and the shads belongs to. And under family Clupidae, the shads belongs to the subfamily Alocinae, which are all distributed throughout the temperate and tropical regions. And we all know that the most common shads belongs to the genus alosa, which occur in the Europe and the Eastern North America. Under the genus Tenulosa, there are 5 species recorded, such as Hilsa shat, Tenulosa elisha, Tenulosa tolli, Macrura, rivesi, and Thibodoi. Among these 5 fishes, the Hilsa, that is the Tenulosa elisha, and to a certain extent Tenulosa tolli are commonly available in the Indian waters. Except Hilsa, all the 4 species, they have very narrow distribution, and they are also anadromous, but the extent of their anadromy is difficult to assess, as most of their life histories are largely unknown. So coming to the distribution of Hilsa, Hilsa inhabits coastal shelf waters, estuaries and freshwater rivers of many countries bordering the Bay of Bengal, Indian Ocean, the Persian Gulf, and the Arabian Sea. But they are most abundant in the Ganga, Brahmaputra, Meghna drainage systems of Bangladesh and India. I'll be covering the ecology of Hilsa by explaining about the migration of the species. We all know that Hilsa is an anadromous migratory species. It means they grow and mature in sea, and they migrate to freshwater for spawning. Just as in the case of salmon, we all know about salmon. And along the coast of Bay of Bengal, Indian coast of Bay of Bengal, Hooghly Bhagirathi or Hooghly estuarine system forms an important migratory path for Hilsa, and this estuarine system supports a rich fishery of Hilsa. Many of us might have heard about the Farakka barrage. It is a barrage built in the river Hooghly or Ganga in the northern Bengal, connecting the districts of Murshidabad and Malda. And after commissioning of this barrage in 1975, the Hilsa fishery became confined to the downstream of this barrage because it became an obstruction to the upstream migration of Hilsa. Before commissioning of this barrage, a thin population of Hilsa used to migrate upstream to Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and even up to Agra. So, and there are some studies about the migratory ecotypes of Hilsa. That is, they say that there are some marine population, marine stock, which only remains in sea, which do not migrate to freshwater, and a potamodromous freshwater ecotype, which restricts their life into freshwater, and the typical anadromous migratory. But there are those studies, the things are still obscure. I would say a few things about the Hilsa spawning also. I forgot to mention about the runs. Though there are some studies which says that the Hilsa migrate throughout the year, there are 2 prominent migratory runs for this species. One is the monsoon run and the other one the winter run. So just as in the case of migration, the spawning also, Hilsa has 2 prominent spawning seasons. The one is the post-monsoon season, that is now October, November in Hooghly, whereas it is around September to October in Bangladesh, and a minor peak in the post-winter months, that is in the February, March, which may extend up to May in some years. And photo period, temperature, and the lunar cycle. These are the few things which are believed to act as cues for the spawning of this species. And the Hilsa spawn in water column. Their eggs are demersal and slightly sticky, and they spawn, they hatch after around 18 to 19 hours of the spawning, and the fertilization is of course external. And for 2 to 4 days, they feed on the egg yolk. And after that, they slowly shifts to the microalgae. And the Hilsa juveniles, the feeding habits, they shifts from the phytoplankton to zooplankton gradually. And once they attain the size of around 80 to 120 mm, they starts to go back to sea. This is the ecology of Hilsa. And I will mention few things about the Hilsa fishery too. We all know that gillnet is the major gear that is used for Hilsa in India. That is, we call Ilish Jal in Bengal. And in the marine areas, trolls also land a significant amount of Hilsa. And regarding Hilsa catch, it is highly dwindling with year-to-year significant fluctuations. And if you take in a decadal average, the current production is around 30,000 tons from the eastern coast of India. And the fishery, the stock assessment indicate that the fishery is a slightly overexploited stage. And I should mention about the rampant juvenile fishing happening in the for Hilsa in the Hooghly and other systems. That is mainly by the use of bag nets. An assessment indicate that the average annual economic loss due to this juvenile fishing is almost around 500 million Indian rupees, which is almost equivalent to the 7.8 million US dollar. And this estimate is bare minimum, as we have taken only rupees 200 as the landing price. And this loss could be colossal if we take it to the further levels of market chain. Yeah, and we need Hilsa for future too. So I would conclude by suggesting some strategies for managing and conserving this important resource. The first and foremost important is the ban on destructive fishing gear such as bag nets. And we all know that there is a legal mesh size allowed for Hilsa, that is 90 mm, and there is poor enforcement of this MLS. And though there is ban in the marine areas, there is no fishing ban in the inland area. So we can think of a seasonal fishing ban for Hilsa, for which we need to compensate for fishers whose livelihoods are mostly depending on this important resource. So PES, Payment for Ecosystem Service, is already implemented in Bangladesh and is found successful. We can think of PES in Indian waters too. And we need to create more awareness among fishers, and also trust to be given on alternate production strategy. There are efforts already for domestication of Hilsa and for developing the aquaculture of practices. And most importantly, we need uniform strategies in the region, like India, Bangladesh, Myanmar. We all share a common stock of Bay of Bengal Hilsa. So we need uniform strategies for the Hilsa management in this region. With this, I conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. For those people who've seen previous webinars, we have an extra speaker today, which is why we're keeping it nice and short, nice and sweet. I would like to mention also there, towards the end, you touched on this idea of transboundary, that the Hilsa fishery is a shared resource. It's not India only, which I alluded to briefly at the beginning. And later on, as we get towards the end, we will also be looking more in a little bit more detail about that idea that it is a shared resource. It's not just Indian. You mentioned that some of the Hilsa stay in the sea. Are there any details of Hilsa that actually stay in the river as well? Because I have heard this today from other countries.
Yes, there is a the papers say that the study indicates that there is a Potamodromus which migrates within the river. And they do not migrate to, but things are still obscure. We need more studies to confirm them. And also we have a case of completely this one adjusted to freshwater reservoir, which we have in Ukai in the Gujarat. We have a reservoir where it's totally landlocked Hilsa population. It's in the Ukai reservoir. There is a rich fishery for Hilsa in the reservoir, but their size is somewhat smaller.
Okay, yes, well, it's good to know. And also it's another, if you like, a common issue that may need to be addressed if they're deliberately cut off, that population, or whether it's part of their ecology, which is something that can be studied in concert with other countries, particularly, I would guess, Bangladesh, but also possibly Pakistan, Myanmar. So there we have a little bit of a look at the ecology of Hilsa fish. And I'm going to move swiftly on, but just before I do that, a mention, if you have any questions for any of our speakers, please drop them in the chat box, and Sneha or Gopa will be collating all of those questions, feeding them through. Likewise, if you're viewing on YouTube, you can leave questions on YouTube, and those questions will come through to us here, so we can ask our experts at the end of the session. And hopefully, if we get through nice and neatly without me waffling too much, we'll have plenty of time for those questions. So we learned a little bit there about Hilsa migration and also about the seasonality, which is something I wasn't aware of until we started discussing this session when we were planning this session, that there are actually commonly two runs of Hilsa. So I just wonder now, how does that seasonality and how does the migration affect those people who are actually living their lives alongside the river. So for that, we're bringing in Sushmita, who is all ready to start by the looks of it. So would I be correct to describe you as a social scientist with an interest in particularly freshwater riverine communities? Would
Yes.
that be correct? Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much. It's over to you to talk to us to start off with about the seasonality and how these issues affect riverine communities.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Sajina, for putting the perspective on the ecology of the fish itself. And I, like Steve clearly mentioned, we are going to be talking about the communities that depend on the hillside and what their lives look like. And because it's a short talk, so I'll try and squeeze in as much as I can. So the structure of my presentation is just these three aspects, which is talking a little bit about communities and then talking about the regulatory frameworks that are there that is impacting both the fish as well as the communities. And from both of these, what are the key learnings that are coming across? And this I'm talking more from the perspective of both India and Bangladesh, though in the community section, I will focus mostly on my experiences within India that I did this work while at IUCN and at IWA. So in India, what we are, and this is pretty much the map of looking at where Hilsa breeding grounds are in focus and what are these areas and what's happening. And like Sujina pointed out, this is the Hooghly River within which we are talking about these communities that there are. So there are three specific communities that do fishing off the Hilsa. They include the Rajbongshis, the Malos, and the Jelekoibortos. The Rajbongshis and Malos are both communities that mostly focus on the freshwater system. They do not come downstream into the estuarine or move into the marine ecosystem. Whereas the Jelekoibortos, while they fish in the estuarine regions of Sundarbans and around Sagar and all of those areas, but they also act as laborers that go into other that are part of the boats and large trawling units that are running into the Bay of Bengal. And as Sajina pointed out, there is a marine stock of Hilsa that's also being caught off the shores from this region. So while talking about these communities, there's very little that is known. It's close to about 8 lakhs, which is 0.8 million people who are dependent on the Hilsa fishery in this region. And that's a huge number if you come to think of it. But there's so little that is known about them. And that was something that I really wanted to focus on as part of the work that we were doing as to what is happening to these communities. All the three communities, while they are lower down the caste group, so they all belong to the scheduled castes of within the caste structure of India. They also, in this region, 70% of their livelihoods, their incomes come out of Hilsa fishing. And that is a critical point, that while we are saying that juvenile fishes are being caught and Hilsa is being overexploited, but it is in the context of what other livelihood sources do these people have. So this is also a point where a lot of them are slowly also moving into casual labor in years when they know that the fishery is not doing well or when there is a lesser run of the Hilsa, and that is when they get into other forms of casual labor, be it as construction labor. There are a few anecdotal evidences, especially from the Rajbongshi and the Malo communities, where they have been taken on by contract fish farmers of Gujarat and Uttar Pradesh, where they go on yearly contracts as farmers for farming fish because of their knowledge around fish that they have. So that is broadly what is happening in terms of the communities that are there in this stretch, which is what is. And from here, moving on to talking about what is the policy saying and where do we, and this is where this graphic is very important, which we had developed as part of our project at the International Water Association, where if you see the inner circle, it is the life cycle of the fish, where the fish is moving from marine to riverine waters and at what points they are going. And if you look at so this is a Bengali depiction because we wanted to use this with fisher folk. So you have the months in English as well as in Bengali. And the orange is showing the ban periods that India has, whereas the green is showing the ban periods that Bangladesh has. So as you would see, most of most of the year. There's actually pretty much a 9-month ban on the fishery at different stretches of the river in Bangladesh. Whereas in India, we have just 2 bans. The coastal ban, of course, is focused on the marine fisheries alone. Whereas the spawning, the one that is very critical when the fish is moving from, because as we know that the fish moves from the marine environment into the freshwater environment, it is at that point that there's a ban between September and usually it's a September-October cycle where there's a lunar period in which we imagine that there's a lot more fish that is coming to the freshwater ecosystem, and that's when the ban has been instituted. Now, this ban came into focus only in 2013, and it's basically a 22-day long ban between September and October. But when you go down on the ground, you see that there's a near lack of implementation of any efforts at implementing the ban itself that is in place. That's one part of the story. The other part of the story is when we are talking about a ban, we have to understand that it has to be based on certain baselines, and those baselines do not exist. What is it that we are tracking? Is it only the increase or decrease in numbers that we are tracking, or are we also tracking how does this impact livelihoods of communities? Because if the fish is of high value, it is because it is providing livelihoods for communities, and there are absolutely no consultations that have happened with communities either about the ban or about its implications. And that has caused a lot of remorse among a lot of communities along the entire river system. And what the policy does talk about are Hilsa sanctuaries. And these Hilsa sanctuaries, while they are identified in policy, they do not seem to be there. I mean, they have not been delineated on the ground. So people do not know where these sanctuaries are because they are supposed to have uh, enough, they are supposed to be the breeding ground for the fish, but doesn't seem like there's any delineation that has happened beyond just having them on the policy front. And that is what it seems as if, you know, it's almost like a paper sanctuary that it's out there, but nobody talks about it. And based on some of those factors, the key points that come to my mind in having worked on Hilsa fisheries and understanding community perspectives has been that the focus on managing the Hilsa has been focused on the decline in numbers. And the decline in numbers has largely been focused through a top-down approach where there have been no consultation with communities or what the community knowledge is there around Hilsa that can help better manage this entire process. The other aspect is the entire breakdown of therefore this common, I mean, a river is a common property that is out there, but communities who have lived along these rivers have managed this. But that process has completely broken down over a period of time because of our policies, because of how communities have not got enough from the river and therefore they have moved out. But there are some elders who will give you examples of what is probably happening. The other aspect, like Sajina rightly pointed out, that it's highly valued as a fish, and therefore it becomes an opportunistic product in some sense. And because fishing per se, while there is knowledge that is needed to fish, but there is a certain amount of knowledge that anybody can just pick up a net and can go into the river if there is a good if there is news that okay, there is more fish in the river and everybody wants a pie of that cake. And that is what is happening with Hilsa. As a result, there is no common unified voice of the community championing the cause for Hilsa conservation because they are caught between these two aspects. And this is what leads to, while one is talking about these aspects of how communities are impacted, it's also the communities who are also impacted because they are coexisting in the river with other mammals such as the Gangetic river dolphin. And I'll leave you with just a small clip from a film that we had produced where the fishermen themselves are talking about how they see the Gangetic dolphin in the context of the river.
While we waited, we could hear the Gangetic dolphins circling around the net.
আমাদের সব কাছাকাছি থাকে একদম, ওই জালের সাথে সাথেই যায় সব। রেখে যায় যে কোথায় মাছ বেঁধেছে, মাছ বেঁধেছে বাদে এরকম দেখলে খেয়ে সচকে মাছ বাঁধে, জালে মাছ বাঁধে, তো জালের থেকে শিবরুতি মাছটা তখন তখন আমাদের জালটা আর কি মানে অনেকগুলো সুবিধা হয়। যখন মাছটা আমদানি হয় তখন শিশুর মাছটা একটু কম থাকে, কারণ ওরা তো নিজের ধরে খেতে পারে, তখন আমাদের জালের থেকে খায়। যখন মাছটা কম হয় তখন ওরা উৎপাদ করে বেশি, তখন উৎপাদ করে মানুষের তো খিদে লাগলে খাওয়া যে উৎপাদ করে, ওরাও কোথায় গেলে আমরা
So that's really about how communities are coming to terms with not just less number of Hilsa, but also coexisting with the Gangetic dolphin. And I leave with you some of the resources, especially this film. If you would like to watch it, there's a YouTube link to the film and some of the people and institutions that I've worked with for this project. Thank you. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you so much. That's incredible. And I've put together a couple of questions of my own, but actually I think I'll leave those until the end, because that video really makes the connection that we wanted to make when we discussed the planning for this session. And then we spoke to Mayuk as well. And you mentioned about the complaints from the fishing communities that the dolphins are raiding the nets, making life more difficult for the fishermen. So immediately I can bring in Mayuk, who's our dolphin expert, and if he's there somewhere.
Yeah,
yes, he's coming online. Hi. And ask, I mean, to what extent do the dolphins predate on the Hilsa and ruin the lives of the fishermen? I mean, what are the dolphins doing? Can you help us with this?
Well, it's difficult to answer that, but perhaps we can explore a bit about their ecology to understand what it is that they feed on and how they do it, and perhaps we can disentangle how much they feed on the other fishes in the river as well. So on that note, please. I'll start sharing my screen.
Okay.
Okay. Do you see the screen?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. So yeah, it's going to be a really short session where I'll try to introduce you to the point how a river dolphin actually experiences its own surrounding, and which is what the word umwelt means. How you perceive how your perception of your entire surrounding. So the way this goes, so we all know there's a bit of a so river dolphins are you find Ganges river dolphins, especially you find them all along the Indian subcontinent in the Ganges and Brahmaputra river system. And what's peculiar about these animals is that they inhabit sediment-rich rivers, which you'll find for most of the Himalayan rivers that we have. And because they've evolved in such a sediment-laden river, they've lost their sense of sight in all senses, in a way. It only serves a purpose to see where light is and it isn't. But other than that, they actually cannot perceive any. They don't have vision, and because of this, they rely almost entirely on sound. And a lot of researchers that have studied them have referred to them as continuous transmitters. And this is a bit of a departure from the other dolphins because they do have eyesight. So they sort of use sound and visual cues to actually interact with their environment. But the river dolphins don't as much. Before we get into the river dolphins, I just wanted to tell you how they've and where they stand in the entire dolphin phylogeny. As you can see, lower down, you have the most ancient dolphins, extant dolphins or whales, and higher up, you have the more recent ones. And honestly, the river dolphins belonging to the Platanistidae family have evolved around between 20 to 25 million years ago, and that's really, really old. So essentially, these are very old lineages, and because of this history, they have certain primitive characters actually. And if you like paleoecology or any of these branches, you will notice that people say that whales and dolphins have evolved from a land-based ancestor, and a missing link to that is this animal called the Pakicetus inachus. And it's called Pakicetus because cetus is whale and Paki because they found it in the. So anyway, so Pakicetus inachus is the animal that was the size of a dog. And what's interesting is they had these whiskers on their snout, like most mammals. And what we find in river dolphins is that they've completely moved into waters and into an aquatic lifestyle. And you see, I'm not sure if you can see these little white hair-like structures on their snout. And that is what people call the vibrisal crypts. And these are basically vestigial organs of sorts, and it's what they use for electroreception. So it's a organ that's been left behind since its land-based ancestor. So apart from sound, even in close proximity, you can imagine in a muddy water, electroreception can also be a very potent way of sensing your surroundings. Yes, because it eats fishes, and most fishes also give out electrical impulses. And another fascinating aspect about river dolphins is that these animals don't necessarily swim like normal dolphins. They're called side swimmers, and it's interesting because they inhabit really shallow rivers. Sometimes you'll find them in depths that are no deeper than your knee, and it's very difficult if you travel normally. So what they do is they have these side swimming behavior, and people speculate that they use their fins to actually touch the substrate and move around so that they can balance themselves in the water, kind of like a blind man feeling the substrate when they're moving around. And the only reason we know all of this is because there have been scientists in the 70s who came from Switzerland and actually flew these animals out from Pakistan to Switzerland and studied them in captivity. So that's the only information on captive river dolphins that we have. It's pretty interesting. And another adaptation to living in these shallow waters is the presence of these bony crests. These are called maxillary crests, and inside these crests they house a fatty organ which is called the melon. And what the dolphins do is they actually produce sound, which is like a click, and these crests basically help it to direct the sound. Otherwise, the sound would just go in every direction. So the crests basically help them to direct the sound that they emit. And I'm not sure if you can hear. So that is what a river dolphin click sounds like. I must mention that we can't really hear the clicks because our hearing sort of subsides after 15 kilohertz, and that's when the river dolphins actually start clicking. So their ranges go from 15 all the way to 160, 170 kilohertz. So we really can't hear them unless you actually slow down the click 4 times so we can actually appreciate it. So this is how they sound like. But remember how I told you that I wanted to take you through the ears of a river dolphin, so to say. So this is what the river sounds like. All the sounds that you hear in the background are all fishes or fish, and these pops, bursts, grunts, they're all fish, and the click that you hear is the river dolphin. The sinuous chirping noise that you hear is actually a mayfly larvae, and this was right before they come out for spawning. So you have mayflies actually calling in the background as well. So, and this is a typical riverine soundscape that you find in the Gulf in the 21st century, we also have a lot of motorized vessels. And as you can hear, vessels completely drown out all of the sound that exists. And this can be particularly problematic for river dolphins that rely on sound, and also for other fishes, because fish also use sound for communication, breeding, and all other social interactions. And so a scene that looked like a robot on the river eventually leads to this. So when you move away from the concept of a river being an entity in its own to being nothing more than just a navigable waterway, you tend to lose sight of what is important in the river. So the Ganges River is also the national waterway #1, which means it has a lot of heavy traffic. And strangely enough, the river dolphins tend to live in these kind of conditions as well. And this is not just problematic to a river dolphin, it's also problematic to fishes. And I'll actually explain this. So this is a spectrogram of river dolphin clicks. Remember all those clicking sounds that you've seen? And it just completely shows that everything is visible out here. But the moment you have a boat going by, you have this entire cloud of noise. So you can't really see any of the clicks anyway. And this is the same thing that the dolphins actually undergo in such a noisy river. And this is not just restricted to dolphins, it's also restricted to fishes. And as you can see, these are two different types of fish calls that you get. And well, because we are talking about Hilsa, this particular call that you see, this really broadband call, is actually from a similar species, the same family. It's a clupid. I think it's called Goniolosa manmina, and Ganges river shad. Yes. So these guys, they also they have a strange way of actually producing sound. They actually release air through their anus, and which is like a fart. And at least the headings in the marine environment use this as a shoaling tactic. So you can actually hear these fish actually producing these sounds when the river dolphins are actually foraging and hunting them. So this sort of correlation is pretty interesting to observe. And yeah, I guess I'll probably end with this because this is going into a very different territory. And I just wanted to thank the organizers out here and NCBS for hosting me during most of the study, and the folks that I work with used. And that's about all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating. And the question still is, do dolphins eat fish? Are they a big threat to Hilsa?
Dan, I don't think so.
No. Okay. A couple of quick comments before I start onto our final presentation. And just to say, it's great to see so much chat going on in the sidebar as well. Some fascinating conversations going on, which again really demonstrates the importance of the platform that we're trying to create through life. So we have people from different countries and from different disciplines talking to each other about shared problems. The soundscape as well. I mean, I've been talking quite a lot today about river connectivity and that fish migrate in all four of the dimensions of river connection. But actually, the soundscape there presents a whole new idea of a barrier to connectivity. We always think about concrete and rocks and earth and embankments, etc. But yeah, sound can, and I guess light would be the same as well, can create a whole barrier to migration, not only of fish, but also whether it's dolphins or gharial, otters, whatever. And I had to smile to see those dolphins in the tank, the side swimmers, because one of my favorite novels of all time is The Hungry Tide. So there we have everything that's at the heart of that novel is about studying the dolphins and seeing them swim on their sides, which is no better way really to lead into our final presentation, because dolphins and freshwater ecology in a novel, it may be the height of cultural use of those metaphors maybe. So I'm going to introduce Preeta, and she'll be talking a little bit about some of the cultural implications, which again looks at the cross-border thing. I need to share my screen now, which is here somewhere. There we are. I'm on the wrong Sorry, just give me 1 second. Let's jump to the correct slide to start off with. And so Preeta's a writer and is also extremely concerned about conservation of Hilsa. So we're going to have her talking. Can everybody see the screen there? Are we in? It looks like we may well be. And we're going to look at the more cultural aspects of Hilsa. So Preeta Sen, the floor is all yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. I have been working with sustainable livelihoods and sustainable foods. I do write, yes, I'm a writer. And while working with this, I realized that the very deep connect that the foods we eat has with identity, and the identity that was shaped with respect to the environment. And that is something, and the ecosystem, that gives us our food. And that we seem to be forgetting. Now, the Hilsa has become, I'm a Bengali, and everybody now today associates the Hilsa with Bengal. But that wasn't really right. The Hilsa at one time populated the waters all across the country in the sense from the Bay of Bengal and from the Arabian Sea. So we had the Hilsa traveling up into the estuaries and up from the Arabian Sea into the Indus. We had it traveling from the Narmada, from this Arabian Sea into the Narmada. We had it traveling down the Kaveri, the Godavari. And of course, now as all our other experts on the panel have spoken about, the Bengal, Bangladesh, Myanmar belt. And from there, it traveled right up to Allahabad. So the Hilsa has a very, very rich and important place in our culinary culture. I work with food, and like I said, I work with sustainable foods. And because of this, I dug deep, and I found that in the Arabian Sea belt, the Hilsa was revered. And the Hilsa actually, every god or goddess in Hindu culture has a vahan or a vehicle. And the Hilsa is the vehicle of the god Jhule Lal, and that the Sindhis worship. He rides, and they call it the palla. He rides on the palla, which immediately tells us how revered the fish was. On the other side, on this side, the Bay of Bengal side, and because I belong here, I know much more about it. The Hilsa was intrinsically linked to culture, I wouldn't call it religion. I would call it folk culture. I would call it community culture. And it sprang from respect for the ecosystem. It's when fishermen went out for the Hilsa catch or Hilsa fishing, they would do a puja. They would actually do a puja, and they would, when they came back from their catch, the fish would be taken by their wives, and that would be offered as an offering to the deity that they worshipped. Now, I am talking about both Hindus and Muslims in Bengal. This was a common culture. And how did it show respect to the environment? Why, even when I was growing up, we never had, and this is the right time to talk about it because Durga Puja is on. Today is Ashtami, and we never had Hilsa post Durga Puja. Tomorrow is Navami, then we have Dasera, and then 3 days later we have Lakshmi Puja. Lakshmi Puja was when we offered a pair of Hilsa, a male and a female. And of course, the significance, you can all understand, it's about procreation, a male and a female, to the goddess Lakshmi, praying for abundance, which means that we want abundant fish next season. And that was when fishing stopped. You know, the best way that our fathers have put in these environmental lessons into our entire culture is by institutionalizing them as rituals. It is not religion. It is not religion. It is about the ecosystem, respect for the environment, respect for every form of life. So therefore, after Lakshmi Puja, which is this entire October, end September, October, early November period, fishing stopped. Nobody fished for Hilsa. It again started for a very brief period, and again a pair of Hilsa was presented to the goddess Saraswati on Basant Panchami, which is in February. And you can see here that that's what the photograph shows, that the pair of Hilsa being offered to the goddess here. And that was when fishing started again. You had sanction to eat. That was for, again, a very brief period till about the beginning of April, and then it stopped. And then the monsoon season, we know that that was the time when, but there again, every region had their own, ways of, putting a break on the fishing cycles. So in West Bengal, when I talk about the Hilsa traditions, I'm talking about undivided Bengal. I was talking about the Hindu culture of East Bengal, what is now Bangladesh, where we had a lot more Hilsa than in West Bengal. So, and I draw my roots to, that's why I say we, by default, I draw my roots to East Bengal. But in West Bengal, it was in the month of Bhadro, towards the end of it, which coincides with late August, early September, month of Bhadro, when you've had enough of the upstream, swim, where they've laid eggs and possibly a large part of the shoals are returning. That time they had something called Ranna Pujo, which means cooking festival. And that day was when they ate the Hilsa and they worshipped the Hilsa and they ate the Hilsa. And that was the day that, you look at all these rituals and you understand that it was ingrained in our systems that how do we conserve the Hilsa? It was so revered that even the scales, the fisher folk that, we were talking about some time ago, the fisher folk used to wear the scales on their forehead as a mark of respect, and in hope that if they did that, they would get a great catch. So, So these are all the little, narratives that we have in this entire Hilsa story, where it is so intrinsically linked to culture and community. And it is also, I find it because of, my interest in conserving the Hilsa. I've been doing a lot of reading, and I have found that, in the early years, this is the first mention of the Hilsa in medieval literature, because we don't have any recorded ancient history, but in recorded medieval literature, the first mention of the Hilsa is in the 12th century by the scholar Jimuti Vana, who was from Bengal, and he wrote legal and religious texts. Now, that's when he mentions the Hilsa for its medicinal properties. And after that, what we find is, and that is something very interesting, we do not find the Hilsa being, yes, the Hilsa has been mentioned as the king of fish, but we do not find this entire obsessive behavior with it. It is rarely mentioned when we have, in texts which have talked about the food that, social narratives that the people ate, and it was a lot of fish, but the Hilsa rarely finds mention that of being cooked. You see, so this entire thing about conserving the fish, which was so precious, that it was not an everyday affair, which has become today. Everybody is rushing to eat the Hilsa. In Bengal, if I come to Bengal, it's, we all know, Bengalis will understand, but to explain, there was, before the partition, there was East Bengal and there was West Bengal. And East Bengal was a larger area than West Bengal, which was a small part of undivided Bengal. East Bengal had three major rivers running through it: the Meghna, the Padma, and the Brahmaputra. Three major rivers. West Bengal had one river. So therefore, of course, you can understand the abundance of fish.
Yes.
And the abundance of the Hilsa. And of course, there's constant fight of which Hilsa tastes better, the Padma or the, the Hooghly or the. Anyway, post-partition.
I have to tell you, there's some comments coming in the chat bar, which includes our friend Tasaduk from Kashmir, who's saying the mouth-watering pictures of your Hilsa curry.
So post-partition, when the Hindu Bengalis had to come into West Bengal as refugees, as displaced persons, of course, there was a kind of a tussle. And soon through the football clubs, it was a kind of, that's what told people what identity was about. So there we had two teams. There was the Mohun Bagan and East Bengal. And so if Mohun Bagan won, it was Golda Chingri or crayfish or scampi, or what you call it, the large jumbo prawns. And if East Bengal won, it was the Hilsa. And there used to be a riot. The mounted police had to be called out, and the markets went crazy. And the fish vendors were ready with their thing, and the prices just went through the roof. It's very interesting to see that today, after 2 generations after the partition, this sense of identity that I am an East Bengali and I'm a West Bengali has slowly merged. We are all Bengalis, and how the entire status of the prawn has gone down. And it's the Hilsa that has become a common Bengali identity in India. And this is very, very interesting at one end, if you're talking about the cultural implications, that the Hilsa has kind of united the this entire thing about West Bengal and East Bengal, and oh, you're a East Bengali and I'm a West Bengali, what we call a Bangal and a Ghoti. That today both talk about the Hilsa being, the Bengali identity. That is really good at one end, but at the other end, because of this sense that the Hilsa belongs to me. No, the Hilsa at one time belonged to the Sindhis, the Hilsa belongs to me, I'm a Bengali. Consumption has just gone through the roof. And, people are eating the Hilsa to death, and that's literally, there's no pun intended here. And the baby, what we call Khoka Ilish, even before they swum to the ocean, as small as 300 grams, 400 grams, because everybody across the board wants to eat the Hilsa. Not everybody can afford it at the prices when it comes at a larger size. A few years ago, we had a very, very lucky bridegroom. His father-in-law bought a Hilsa that cost 22,000 rupees a kg.
Wow.
So that's how, and catching these Khoka Ilish or the baby Hilsa, I mean, we are completely destroying whatever. So it is, and I'm going to use this platform to request all those who are fueling this entire obsession with the Hilsa, the hotels, the restaurants, everybody is aspirational. If a 5-star hotel has a Hilsa festival, because you have deep pockets, you can buy the large size Hilsa. The ones lower down the rungs do not, but they're aspirational. They also want to do the same thing. Please stop these festivals.
A good point. Yes. Could I just
festivals?
I'll interrupt you there if you don't mind, because we're running out of time, and I'd like to have a couple of questions coming in.
Absolutely. And please do.
If you look in the chat bar now, if you click on the chat at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there's already been a lot of discussion about the price of Hilsa as well.
Yes.
So maybe you can feed into some of that. And as you mentioned, talking about seasons, and not taking the small ones, which has been touched on before in other forums about fish, and also Sushmita mentioned it earlier. And there was a question actually from Sajina about the most important issue in Hilsa management and conservation efforts, and what's called the top-down approach, where everything that you've mentioned is more about the understanding, the deep knowledge within the community. So I'll bring in Sushmita, if I could, to ask, do you think there is a way that we can change fisheries governance in India as a whole? So not specifically Hilsa. I look at this with Marcia fish, but can we do anything about fisheries governance in India as a whole?
This conversation can go on forever when it comes to fisheries governance in India. I mean, I think the key thing here is really how do we bring communities back to a position where they can start talking about their resources. I mean, what has happened with the Department of Agriculture, which also takes care of the Department of Fisheries. I mean, fisheries is subsumed within agriculture in some sense. The focus has been technological. The focus has been Blue Revolution, which is about nets, about gear, about farming, and we're talking about farming Hilsa. And I don't know if as a Bengali, I would like to have a farmed Hilsa at the end of the day. It will be the wild Hilsa that will be more tastier and more revered than the farmed Hilsa. So I don't understand the reason why any of these institutions or why the government should be pushing for farming of Hilsa when it can be managed with better governance practices, which includes communities, which includes outreach with different stakeholder groups. And that's what is missing right now, because we have a siloed approach towards managing our rivers. And when we are talking rivers, it has to be talking about silting issues. It has to talk about issues of the loss of depth. It's about issues like Sajina, like Preetadi have been talking, that it is a transboundary fish. It is a migratory fish. We are talking about it on a World Fish Migration Day, and India still is not wanting to be part of a joint stock assessment when it comes to the Bay of Bengal. So we really need to look at all of those aspects if we really want to talk about fisheries governance, and communities lie at the heart of that.
You know, a few years ago, I'd like to say something here. There was an attempt to farm the hilsa, and the people rejected it. It tasted awful, and so that experiment and project was stopped because nobody wanted to buy it. It didn't work. It cannot work in captivity.
Yeah. Okay. I'll move on to another question, which is away slightly from talking specifically about conservation of hilsa, and bring Mayuk back in, because we had a question from Srinivas who asked, are river dolphins hampered more profoundly than fishes by these noises that we're introducing into the river landscape, or as Srinivas called it, the river soundscape? Sorry, the anthropogenic soundscape. So, Mayuk, do you think this is more of an impact on dolphins than it is on fish?
To be honest, it's difficult to quantify the impact on fishes because we don't know the baseline for them to begin with. So all of what I will say, or all of what people will say, will mostly be from the perspective of a dolphin. So we can't really answer who gets hit the most, but there is evidence to show that yes, dolphins do get hammered quite a bit. Based on the biology and the ecology of the fishes, and why they use sound for what purposes, one could like hypothesize that yes, they too may be affected, but we don't really have any concrete evidence, at least for riverine fish. You do have a lot of evidence on marine fishes as well, but nothing as of now for riverine fishes. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And I'll jump back to a question that popped into my head, and it was actually while Sushmita was talking. And you said that a lot of the members of the fishing community, because of their expertise in fishing, they're finding jobs in other places, I guess through aquaculture, wider aquaculture, and they're being given yearly contracts. So is this a bonus for the hilsa fishery? Does this mean there are fewer people actually involved in the fishing effort specifically for hilsa if most of the better fishers are going away for better contracts?
Well, that's again something that I would not be for sure able to answer, because one, it has not, I mean, there's no definition of who is a hilsa fisher. And like I said, because of the commercial value of hilsa, everybody becomes an opportunistic fisher during the season when there's a run of the fish. And it's even a school teacher who can wheel a net will go into the river and start fishing, because hilsa is, like Pritadi was saying, is so much part of our culture. It's like in the season you have to have at least one hilsa, if not more. And it's in that context that I don't know if it's a linear equation to say that if the best fishers are going off, so that will mean it's good for the hilsa, because I feel that taking the community out of the equation will not do good to the fish, because ultimately it is a certain amount that was getting taken off, and we need the community to be there because they live there. If today the main fisher is not there, it's the children of the fisher, or in the case of Bangladesh, it's the women fishers. So there are Nokabashi Jeles who go into and they are often women-headed households because they don't have any other source of livelihood. So they are on the river fishing for the fish. And it is in that context that we cannot necessarily think that just because communities are moving out is a good thing, because if communities are moving out, somebody else is replacing it who probably has less knowledge about the fish and has less knowledge about the biology of the fish, and that does not help the cause.
Okay, thank you. And also I saw quite a bit of discussion in the chat bar about the tagging of hilsa. So I'll bring Sajina in here. And also then this will cut back to what a lot of you, particularly Preeta, has mentioned about farmed Hilsa, because you work for ICAR, which basically is an agricultural establishment. So is your work concerned more with the tagging, or are you looking at production of Hilsa? Is that part of what you do?
Yeah, there was a multi-institution, to me, no? Yeah. There was a multi-institutional project by National Agricultural Science Fund for the domestication of Hilsa. So actually, I was mostly focused on the natural stock assessment and the catch estimation part. But our team was looking after domestication, means pond aquaculture development, and also cage in the marine, and also brackish water. So many places in brackish water, they go to maturity up to advanced stage. Like that. And yeah, as Sushmita mentioned, the taste factor is there, but maybe some 50 years before or 60 years before, salmon also, they might have said that I won't prefer a farmed salmon, but now farmed salmon is very much popular. Like that, Hilsa also, one day it may be the cultured Hilsa also may be popular. But the taste factor is a factor, but with the feed ingredients, feed additives, we can work on that part also. And yeah, but there are still, it is not that much cost worthy, because a Hilsa of the 1 kg, it will take minimum 2 years in the pond to take. So that much price, it is not economically viable now. And I will agree to that point that conservation is the most important thing that can that will add to the fishery, because we are catching a lot of juveniles that we can conserve. So aquaculture can be a subsidiary activity. The focus should be on the conservation.
Yes, yes. And there's a nice little comment in the sidebar there from Gopa. The Bengalis are all shaking their heads vigorously. They're up in arms at your idea of having fish from aquaculture, Hilsa from aquaculture. And just another comment from Gopa, which takes me back to the question I raised a moment ago to Sushmita. When and if you do see people coming in from non-traditional communities, do you see a change in the fishing methods? So are they using things like dynamiting and poisoning instead of netting?
No, I haven't come across dynamiting and poisoning. I have heard of poisoning in the context of Bangladesh. I haven't heard that in the Indian context. But again, I should refrain myself from saying that, because up in the Brahmaputra, the Hilsa that's going from the Padda, which is because of the conservation efforts of Bangladesh, there are some cases which there is dynamiting possibly happening, but I haven't looked at that so carefully. So would not be right for me to comment on that. But generally in this region, I haven't seen so far any cases of dynamiting or poisoning.
Okay, thank you. So I think we should draw to a close almost. And what I'll do is, there's a little comment just dropped into the chat bar there again from Tassaduk, saying the taste and flesh color is a factor and may differ in wild and cultured fish stocks. We also experience it in rainbow trout in Kashmir. And certainly I've experienced it in other fish as well. So I wonder, Preeta, if you can you draw into words what it is about the taste of Hilsa that makes it, as you said, the king of fishes? Can you put it into words to help us close the session? Why is Hilsa so valued? You need to unmute. You're muted at the moment. Okay. Yes.
The Hilsa is valued because from the time, like I said, recorded history, it was called the silver harvest of the waters. And the fishermen believed that if you buried the scales, the silver scales inside their homes, it would turn into gold coins. Huh? And it was the difference between a West Bengal Hilsa and a East Bengal, or now Bangladesh Hilsa, was that one had a pink tinge as it got into the estuary, and the other developed a golden tinge when it got into the estuary. And it was all these physical attributes along with the taste. You know, when a marine fish enters the fresh water, the flesh gets, because we are not really sea fish eating people. We are a freshwater eating people. But this complete blend of tastes, I think, made it the king of fish. You know, this entire salt and fresh water, and of course the feed. And from what I've read, that it's a lot of the planktons and drinking a lot of the river water as they move upwards is what, what in the taste, and which is why farming in ponds is not going to work. We might as well just stop eating the hilsa after that.
Thank you so much. That's a perfect way to end. Which leaves me just to say, all of our guest speakers today, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your unique insights, which leaves us, as always, with the question of what is it exactly that we don't know? There is so much work to do in so many avenues. We need to connect people across country boundaries. We need to connect people within river basins, and we need more people to be aware of what's happening within the river basins as well, not only with species, but also the cultural aspects and the ideas of hydrology, geological processes as well, which is why we're here. And you can see at the bottom, our next session will be on the 20th of November. We'll be looking at riparian habitat, and Gopa will be hosting that particular session. He has some great speakers lined up. Hope to see you all there, and thanks for joining us on World Fish Migration Day, which is also World Freshwater River Dolphin Day, and is also, I learned earlier, World Snow Leopard Day, but we didn't manage to get them into the talk. It's a shame, but never mind. See you all again soon. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here.